Hi. Two of my favorite figures from church history, and particularly the translation of the Bible into English, were John Wycliffe and William Tyndale. I could tell you all kinds of stories about them, but one of the most important, valuable sources for information on their lives is Fox's Book of Monuments and Acts and Monuments of the Martyrs. You've heard of Fox's Book of Martyrs, probably, but that's an abridgment of these three volumes, which were the Ecclesiastical History containing the Acts and Monuments of Martyrs. John Fox died in 1587. The printing on these three volumes was 1641, so it was after his death. But subsequent editions of this work reflect conditions and possibly even original pages that existed during his lifetime. That is especially evident in that this book is still dedicated in Volume 1 to Queen Elizabeth I, who was long dead in 1641. In fact, she'd been gone for several decades. There's also a summary of Fox's own life and work here. But as we take a peek at these three volumes, almost 400 years old, we'll see Queen Elizabeth I, we'll see the execution of William Tyndale, spreading of John Wycliffe's ashes 41 years after his death, a fold-out of Windsor Castle. A fold-out is still there in the second volume. And there are descriptions of John Wycliffe and the Lollards, ancient dissenters of Roman Catholicism in the 1400s. There are lots and lots of woodcuts. I've gotten several pictures from these books that we put into a new book that I'm coming out with, Inspiration to Ink, a book on how we got the Bible. Many of these woodcuts detail the torture and the death of those who paid a very heavy price to oppose the Roman Catholic hierarchy and the powers that be. There's a chronology of major events in church history with emphasis on the British Isles and English and Reformation history in Europe. And so let's take a peek at some of the pictures here. I'm going to be looking at it here, and hopefully you'll get a close-up. You have the title page, Acts and Monuments of matters most special and memorable happening in the church, with a universal history of the same, special emphasis on martyrs. You have a dedication page to the right virtuous, most excellent and noble princess, Queen Elizabeth, our dread lady, by the grace of God, Queen of England. Beautiful woodcut there. Turn a few pages and you have Henricus the Emperor, Emperor Henry, with his wife and child barefoot and bare-legged, waiting on Pope Hildebrand 3 days and 3 nights at the gates of the papal palace before he was allowed to come in. In these days, popes were often more powerful than emperors, and that point is made. Description of the poisoning of King John by a monk at Swinstead Abbey in Lincolnshire. This is a very famous woodcut right here. The order and manner of taking up the body of John Wycliffe and burning his bones 41 years after his death. They dug up his bones, burned them into ashes, and cast the ashes over the river Swift. And then finally, volume 1, you have some woodcuts of pompous popes who are depicted in all their glory. And that was especially troubling to many of the humble English people who were looking for something better in high churchmen, as they were very poor often themselves. We have volume 2. Here is the second volume, 7th book, beginning with the reign of King Henry VIII. Very important period in turning point in terms of the Reformation. description of the godly constancy of Thomas Bailey, or Bilney rather, who was in prison, oftentimes proved the fire with his finger, ultimately testing that finger as his whole body would be burned at the stake. This is a very, very famous woodcut. The martyrdom and burning of William Tyndale in Flanders at Filford Castle. His last words, famous translator of the Bible into English from the original Greek and Hebrew for portions of the Old Testament, Lord, open the King of England's eyes. And you have that in this woodcut. And here, description of Windsor Castle. This is a fold-out, still intact. And you have persecution and burning of Protestants right outside the castle. And John Fox documents all of that. You have the 9th book containing acts and things done in the reign of King Edward VI. Typical scenes from that period of time. And then the 3rd volume here. You have some martyrs who are hung and then burned in the fire. Terrible, terrible persecutions. Typical scene from that period of time, and yet as people are going about their business, you have in the background people being burned at the stake. And then finally, at the very end, a lively picture describing the weight and substance of God's most blessed word against the doctrines and vanities of men's traditions. This is a classic 3-volume work. These things are monsters. They're heavy, and wouldn't want to drop them. But you have in all of this a fascinating 3-volume set, an original witness to the faith and practice of dissenters and Protestants in the late Middle Ages, and especially in the 1500s when the Reformation began. It's a sobering reminder and a monument to the faith and sacrifices of those who have gone before us and the price that they paid so that we might benefit from their sacrifices.